Thank you all for joining us. I'm in mid-conversation with Zev Shalev. Zev Shalev, you know him, you love him. You should follow him on narrative.org. Zev is an independent investigative reporter. He's been on the Epstein money trail for years. How many years have you dedicated of your life to
It
this?
is almost 10 years. I can't believe a full decade of my life just trying to figure out the money around Jeffrey Epstein, Donald Trump, and company because it's a never-ending trail. I mean, there's criming aplenty, so there's lots to follow.
There's a criming aplenty, and there's now corporate mainstream media is finally figuring out these names like Leon Black, and finally figuring out names like a Wexner, and finally figuring out that maybe Michael Cohen isn't on the level. We'll talk about all that stuff because apparently
Big
Zev,
cheese.
myself, Ellie are conspiracy theorists and whatnot, and so Michael Wolf and Michael Cohen don't like us right now. We'll talk about that later.
Yeah.
But you have a series called The Greatest Heist. All right, before we get into it, promote the series.
Well, the greatest heist is really about the Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein pulling off the greatest crime in history. And it sounds far-fetched until you dig into the details. What we track all the way, there's two books. So the first book was about how Trump and Epstein were basically, lured by the KGB and the Russian influences around them to become assets for Russia, and an interesting network of people that included Adnan Khashoggi and other kind of well-known money and arms laundering people. But book two is where it gets really interesting. And book two is about what happened in 2008. And I figured out how Jeffrey Epstein was involved in triggering and basically figuring out the entire crash, designing almost the crash of 2008. And we've got all the receipts to prove that that's what happened. And it's interesting that as we were discovering that, Howard Lutnick's name showed up in the same scheme back in 2008, also part of that trigger of the 2008 crash. And so when you pull back the scale, the premise behind, or the view, whatever would be the lens, when you pull it back, you realize that this is not just a network of human traffickers and child abusers. This is a network of financial criminals who have repeatedly crashed the market, or more like pumped and dumped the market. So they would increase the market's value, juice it up with all sorts of technologies like derivatives and mortgage-backed securities, and now crypto. And then they would crash it, and they would sell high and buy everything low. And the people buying on the low side were the sovereign funds of all these countries that we're now engaged with. Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, Russia, all those countries making money off the backs of Americans as they crashed the markets.
Well, I mean, for those who say this sounds crazy, I do want to ask you to look right now at the United States and the latest data and reports that have come out in the past week, where just magically, while we're in this illegal, reckless war, Zev, just some people, we don't know who, but it's going to be traced eventually, are just making billions of dollars right before Trump's announcements. They're buying and selling. Isn't that wild, Zev?
It's just a pattern. It's sort of, you start looking at it and you think, well, this is coincidence and can't be true. But the more you look at it and you more see how much it is, it's been happening for decades. There's an estimate of $80 trillion that have been pulled out of the U.S. market, of the U.S. Treasury and taxpayers' money over 40 years. And it's stunning when you think about all the crashes we had. You had 1987. Epstein was involved in that. Leon Black was involved in that. You go up to, even 9/11 was one of those instances where people are wondering now, especially with Howard Lutnick and those, what was that all about? Was that also a trigger for the markets? You get COVID, also maybe a trigger for the market. Certainly, it was manipulated to a large extent. 2008, we've spoken about, and each time these guys get more and more brazen with the amounts that they're basically stealing from the American people. And they also are, ruthless about it. They not only are taking the American people's money, they want the bailout that the governments are funding at the end. So what we found out in the greatest heist is that Jeffrey Epstein had a thing called liquid funding that he buried inside Bear Stearns. And liquid funding was bailed out by the taxpayers to the tune of $6.7 billion. Liquid funding was his money, Wexner's money. We suspect it's Trump's money as well. So while everyone else was losing their shirt around them, Donald Trump, Jeffrey Epstein, Wexner, and all company were making a bucket load, and they were being bailed out by the U.S. federal government.
That's why the 2008 2009 "too big to fail" is one of the few phrases, Azev, that triggers me towards rage. And I'm a very usually calm person who keeps chai and carries on. But it literally is the same architects and the buddies and the pals who are responsible for the financial crisis were brought on in the Democratic Obama administration to somehow restore us, and they restored us by bailing out the same people who were responsible for getting us in the mess. And you fast forward 20 years, and it might be just 20 years, folks. It's 2026. I have a feeling this AI crypto bubble is going to burst, Zev. If it's successful, that means the massive wiping out of like thousands of jobs, both manufacturing jobs and white collar jobs. So we're at that way. But if it fails, and I think it will fail, there's going to be another bubble burst. And Zev, almost 20 years to the date, we might hear the same refrain: "Too big to fail." Your take?
Well, that's very prescient and I think accurate. I think what we're going to see is the crypto bubble operate like the mortgage-backed securities did in 2006, 2007, into the 2008 crash. It's actually, in just the last few days, I've been publishing this closed loop that exists between Howard Lutnick's Cantor Fitzgerald and Tether. Tether is that stable coin that is linked to the US dollar. Their custodian is Cantor Fitzgerald, which is Howard Lutnick's former company. I'll say former because it really still is his involved company. And they have $1.3 billion in treasuries, US treasuries, locked inside Cantor Fitzgerald to secure all the stable coins in Tether. That's one thing that's already dangerous for the economy because what happens if one of those collapses? You've got $133 billion that have got to be liquidated. But what's more disturbing than that is when Lutnick became the commerce secretary, he gave his or sold his company and his assets in that company to his children in a trust.
Yeah.
That trust was funded and financed because these kids didn't have the money, or so they claimed, by Tether. So Tether it not only owns the cryptocurrency, it owns the custodian of that cryptocurrency, and it owns the family that supposedly is looking after this whole thing. And Lutnick is the guy in the White House who can actually determine whether they'll get a bailout or not if it all crashes. So it is such a
Secretary of
corrupt
Commerce.
loop. Yeah, well, he'll certainly have influence. I mean, it will come from Treasury, but it certainly will come from Commerce as well. But you can see how that is a very dangerous situation. We don't even know who Tether is. It's like four obscure guys around the world, most of whom don't even want to be involved in it. In fact, in December 2024, they were under investigation by the DOJ under the Biden administration. First thing Todd Blanche does when he walks into the DOJ, kills the cryptocurrency investigations, all of them. Suddenly, Tether's back in favor. They've got a puppet in the White House in Howard Lutnick, and they're free to do whatever they want to do. They can basically run the gamut with all their crypto policies.
And I want to just spend a little bit of time on crypto because the latest Epstein files reveals that Epstein's, I hate using this word, let me put it another word, fingerprints are pretty much all over the supervillain plots of 2026. He kind
Mm.
of helped seed it, or he helped elevate it, or he was involved in conversations, or he helped promote it with his money, right? The eugenics, the right wing assault on our truth and democracy and misinformation. And he was also interested in Palantir, Peter Thiel, Israel, Russia, and crypto. And it sounds like, again, a conspiracy theory. Like someone said this to you, they're like, "This is conspiratorial. There's no way. Oh, you guys are just trying to like make an easy storyline." But the facts are there, aren't they?
No.
Like
Yeah.
literally through the emails and the relationships and the financial transactions and Bank of America, which, by the way, for those who don't know, just settled with Epstein's victims, and J.P. Morgan and Bear Stearns.
It's more than just the fingerprints. I mean, we've seen the documents. I was so stunned when I came across this one email from Jeffrey Epstein to Thorgan Jagland, who's a Norwegian diplomat, who was a conduit basically between Jeffrey Epstein and Vladimir Putin. And in this email, Jeffrey Epstein tells Yagland that he wants to meet Putin, and Putin and Yagland is actively pursuing this meeting for Epstein in order to tell him about a plan that could leapfrog Russia over the U.S. Using the financial markets or a modernization of the financial markets. And the way he was suggesting they do it is through a new type of money, new types of digital transactions, basically cryptocurrency. Now, we don't know if that meeting took place, but we know that the next day, even in his calendar, Epstein has a thing saying that he wants to plan for the Putin meeting in his next day. And there's a back and forth between Yagland and and Jeffrey about how that meeting will take place and when. And Jeffrey says, it'll be it can only be a 3 hour meeting at a minimum. I won't see him for less time than that. Really holding the cards. And one of the things he claims in that email was that he created the derivatives back in the 70s that created where we are to, created the environment for the 2008 crash and all these others. So he is, for lots of people called him a financial mastermind. I think these documents are actually beginning to point that he is that, but he's a criminal financial mastermind.
And you just look at the facts, right? Because I always like to look at the facts and what we separate facts from what our assumptions are, right? So this is what I believe. This is what we know. If you
Mm.
look at the Epstein files, folks, he met all these people. What Zev is saying is he was interested in crypto. He was interested in meeting with Steve Bannon. He was Brock Pierce of Mighty Ducks and
Brock
crypto.
Pierce is a big name in all of this. I mean, you know who invented Tether? Who's the founder of Tether? Brock Pierce.
Yes. Can you
The
tell people who
same.
Brock Pierce is for those who don't know?
Yeah. So, he's this really eccentric guy. I guess he made some sort of career in Hollywood before
Former
becoming this.
actor, was in Mighty Ducks 3, I believe.
Okay, thank you for that. I haven't seen his work on stage, I mean, on film, but I certainly am aware of his crypto work, which is he's made billions selling Tether and other properties. But he's also was the number one consultant for Jeffrey Epstein on crypto. He was the guy consulting him. And there's a Rolling Stone cover from Rolling Stone Arabia with him on the cover that I posted the other day, which just shows you this outrageous kind of character, crazy hats and crazy outfit that he was wearing, who's now because gazillionaire probably from all the things he's been able to push. But this is a scheme. These guys are building a scheme in order to trap the American economy. I call it like a time bomb strapped on the US economy. Whenever they want to trigger it, they can trigger it and they'll trigger that crash. They won't get hurt. They'll be out before that crash happens. Americans will get hurt, and then Americans will be holding the bag. And then they'll come in with their sovereign funds and buy everything at pennies on the dollar.
Yeah, buy low, sell high. You're seeing it in real time, folks. For example, just 1 week ago, unusual stock trades 15 minutes before Trump posted about Iran spark insider trade concerns.
Mhm.
Someone or some group bought large shares of stock index futures and sold off large amounts of oil futures just 15 minutes before Trump posted online that he was halting planned strikes in Iranian power plants. Huh. It's so shameless and naked that you could literally see it in the graph, folks. You could see it in real time,
Yeah,
despite
and it's his family that are benefiting from this. I mean, when you think about crypto, and as they did with that oil surge, they benefited from the oil surge. They're benefiting from the crypto as well because it's his family that owns World Liberty Financial. They're 50% of that. With whom do they own it? Well, with the Emiratis and the Saudis and the Qataris, and I'm sure Israel will be in there somewhere. It's this endless group of the same characters showing up all the time, making a fortune of these so-called technologies that they bring into America, but they're just scams. They're just scams that people are falling for them time and time again.
And U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth's broker looked to buy defense fund before Iran attack. That was according to Financial Times,
Yeah.
came out less than a day ago. Speaking about crypto, because I've been trying my best to follow it. I know a lot of people haven't because there's just so much chaos. But we're Liberty Financial. Can you just go into this? Because basically, in the past year, Donald Trump has done everything so openly, so nakedly, so shamelessly. But there's so many crises that people aren't paying attention. So you got him and his sons making $5 billion to World Liberty Financial. The fraudster and money launderer CZ, who's his business partner, Donald Trump pardoned him.
Mhm.
Binance. The speaking about more fraud, you mentioned UAE.
Mhm.
UAE invested what was it, $500 million in World Liberty Financial. Fast forward a few months, who gets the special NVIDIA AI chips? UAE.
UAE.
Uh,
And they invested that a week before the elections. I think it was just before the elections that they invested that. So they had some foresight about what was going to happen with this administration and their, pro crypto policies. Uh, it is, World Liberty Financial is a cash cow for Donald Trump and his family. They're estimated to be worth now about $10 billion from all
oh,
these
now
crypto
it's 10.
holdings.
Wow.
They were broke before. You know, this is all grift. This is all them saying, "Sure, give us the money. We'll go to war. Give us the private jet. We'll do all these things for you. No problem." They're just using the American military right now, I believe, as mercenaries based on. But they're the ones profiting from it. It's not even America's going to profit. America's going to land up suffering because of it.
Yeah, so I mean, you have Donald Trump openly saying, "We'll want their oil." Oil. This is a couple of days ago. We'll get the oil, control the oil. It'll be the best oil, and it's not just the oil. Even if you don't get the oil, look how they're making their money, folks. They're making their money through insider trading. They're making their money through grifts, right?
Yeah.
It's insider trading starting from the White House. Who's the person who can control whether or not I'm going to announce I'm going to, disrupt the markets, if I'm going to go occupy Carg Island, if I'm going to hold back, if I'm going to send troops? It's President Trump. And literally, I just
Mhm.
want to say again, you've seen it in the past week. For those people who said this is crazy, you've literally seen it in real time in the past week. Mysterious purchases, mysterious dumps, 15 minutes before Trump's announcement. And then Pete Hegseth, who's the Secretary of War, denies it. But why else would his broker be looking to do this, Zev?
Oh, I mean, they're looking, they know what's coming. They know how to play the markets. It's not only them. Look how much money Russia is making right now because of
Oh,
the war
windfall.
in the Middle East. And also Iran making a lot of money unusually from this war because oil prices are up. It's $4 a gallon right now. This is only helping our adversaries and our enemies. And when Russia said, is helping Iran target the air bases in Sudan, as they did on the 26th, with satellite images, according to Zelensky, on 3 consecutive days or something like that, in order to figure out exactly how they're going to strike American bases using Russian satellite imagery.
Yep.
And we say nothing. 12 servicemen are injured. Lots of planes can't be used. They've been blown apart. And America does nothing to retaliate against Russia or Iran or Saudi Arabia, frankly, who also seem to have allowed that attack to happen.
Yeah, and folks, it was revealed about 2 weeks ago that Russia, as Zev was saying, is literally aiding Iran in identifying U.S. targets. And then America's response was, "All right, we'll remove these sanctions off you, Russia." So Russia now
Mm,
gets to sell oil. Russia's getting a windfall. The greatest winner so far is Russia. I would say another winner is Iran in the long term. Of course, it's taking
mm.
heavy civilian casualties. But Scott Bessent, you just heard him a couple of days ago, maybe we'll remove sanctions
Yeah,
from Iran
crazy, right?
just
I
so
mean,
they
that's that.
could release oil. And then you had Donald Trump yesterday saying, "I, we could close the war with the Strait of Hormuz still closed. We could end the war with the Strait of Hormuz still closed." I'm like, so wait a second. You went to war. You got rid of the older dying Khamenei. You replaced him with a younger, more radicalized Khamenei. We lost billions of dollars. We're going to lose civilians and soldiers. America's more loathed. And we're going to come out of it with the Strait of Hormuz closed. Where's
Yeah,
the
at $4 a gallon for oil. And Carolyn Levitt today, what did she say? She was like, now the story is that we killed the Iranian leaders because they weren't telling us the truth. They were negotiating with us in good faith. That's actually what she said out loud at the press briefing. I was like, your story shifts so much. And this is the craziest version of that story, that because your negotiating partners weren't being honest with you, as if you're honest with anybody, that's the reason you assassinated them. I mean, the sliding morality scale, if there ever was one for this administration, is beyond belief. It just plunges into nothing.
someone just said this is the most incompetent group of individuals. Yes, incompetent, reckless. There are also religious fanatics, cosplay crusaders, Christian Zionists. But something that, Zev, I think you've highlighted, and we should always remember, but oftentimes it gets lost, is they're all grifters. They're
Mm-mm.
all financial grifters. At the end of the day, they're criminals. At the end of the day, they'll sell their own mother to make a profit. I think this is a key thing, is that they don't care about morality, ethics, national security. I also want to remind people, because it's already forgotten in the news, that the House Judiciary Committee is not shocking at all, but announced that Donald Trump had taken such sensitive national security data that only six other people in the world knew about it, and that was in his shitter in Mar-a-Lago. So if I see his pattern behavior, Zev, I'm looking at a person and a cabal that is literally willing to sell American soldiers, American lives, American security, Americans and their cost of living, and national secrets to the highest bidder for a quid pro quo.
Because that's absolutely correct. Because if I remember correctly, the plans to invade Iran, the top secret plans to invade Iran, were amongst those papers that were allegedly taken by Donald Trump to Mar-a-Lago. So who did he give those plans to? Who of his Mar-a-Lago guests accidentally bumped into them in the bathroom or wherever it was that he had hidden? Which of his, foreign mobster friends? And what you're saying about the history of these guys is totally true. I mean, Trump, it was raised in the mob. He is a mob person. He's a mafia don. And he has been all his life. He's been working with the La Cosa Nostra. And then after that, he started working with the Russians because they were doing a different kind of criming than just the street level mafia crimes from before. Now they were manipulating stock, and he loved that one. And so ever since then, they've been, with Jeffrey Epstein and the whole cabal of them have been working to pump and dump the market anywhere they can, whether it's oil, whether it's the general stock market, or whether it's individual stocks. And there's an endless record, and it all ties back to Russia. It's like, I'm so tired of that refrain, but it just every time I go into a story, everything leads to Russia. What Nancy Pelosi, famously did that one meeting where she pointed to Donald Trump and said, "With you, all roads lead to Russia," is absolutely correct. It is
Well,
Russia.
well, there's someone who might be skeptical. If you introduce the data point of Leon Black, use Leon Black and his relationship to Epstein and Trump to make the case that most of the recent roads go back to Russia.
Well, there's 158 billion, million dollars that was paid to Leon Black from Jeffrey Epstein, one of his biggest clients. We all know that he was one of his biggest clients. The roads that lead back to Russia is that Leon Black also was a key member and the only American at the time, though there was another one later, on the Russian Development Fund, the RDIC, I think. And that's led by Kirill Dmitriev, who is well known for his involvement in 2016 and still is with the Trump administration. So you've got an American guy who, by my research, was involved in the 1987 crash. There was a company called Burnham Lambert that collapsed. It was Leon Black who worked at Burnham Lambert who took that, and when that market crashed in 1987, he opened Apollo. Apollo became this huge company, but Apollo is linked to Russia. A lot of its business comes from Russia. A lot of the kind of trading that they do is Russian connected. And there's a picture of him at the board meeting of the RDIC with, it's RDIF actually, I think, with Vladimir Putin, two seats away from him. He's smiling at Leon Black. These guys have been close to that world forever. And Epstein paid 158 million for supposedly, got paid 158 million supposedly for tax advice from that he was giving Leon Black. But no one can really understand what that's for. It's not normal accounting. No one pays someone $158 million. What we found out recently is that a lot of it was to pay off women. That
Yeah,
Leon Black, if you look at the Epstein files, there are many stories of people who claim that Leon Black was biting them, abused them mercilessly, some underage, just really a horrific
vicious,
person.
vicious
And
predator.
and vicious is the right word. And so that's the relationship that Epstein had with one CEO of one company, Apollo. You can imagine all these other relationships, but this is the back and forth of this kind of criminal network. Yeah, we'll cover up your mess that you created with this women or these women. We'll pay all these women off, but in the meantime, you owe us, you owe us, you owe us. And we don't know what the IOUs always are, but there's always an IOU. And 158 million is quite a lot of money for Jeffrey Epstein. And at one point, Epstein even contacts his FSB contact, who's the deputy economic minister in the U.S. in the Russia, sorry, Sergei Belyakov, and he asks Belyakov for information about a woman who was claiming that Leon Black abused her. And this guy didn't work at the FSB, but he trained at the FSB. Just one assumes he's still connected to the FSB, and now works at the economic ministry in Russia. Provided information to Jeffrey Epstein in order to help Leon Black get this lawsuit off his back. That's the kind of stuff that, I mean, I don't know how to do that. Do you know how to call someone at the FSB and say, hey, my friend's got a problem. How do I kill this thing? It just doesn't happen. But Jeffrey Epstein knew because he was part and parcel of this whole thing. So is Leon Black.
And also, Leon Black partied in Russia with Donald Trump,
All right.
where they both attended strip clubs and allegedly did some dirty deeds.
1996, I think, was when they went together to this weird trip because Trump was bankrupt. There was no reason for him to go there. But my research suggests that he got a big payoff coming out of that particular trip with Leon Black. And there's one morning video of him having a meeting with some Soviet officials at the time. Was it Soviet? No, it was Russian officials at the time. And the Leon Black looks like he just got dragged out of bed. He looked so hungover. And I think it was the night after one of those long nights at the strip club. But, it is clear that they got a lot of compromise on these guys. And some of them loved it. I mean, to this day, Trump raves about Russian women and how kinky they are and how much he loves them. This is how they got at a lot of these guys. They gave them, the wildest nights, their fantasies played out for them. In reality, they were being, used, but that's that's the story.
Yep, but that's honeypots and compromat. And then Epstein also used compromat in the form of literally providing minors, and then these men raped them, assaulted them. So I would go so far as to say, most likely, I'm sure, well, if we're going to find out that some girls were murdered, and we know that Israel provided all the surveillance in the New York apartment. How does Israel connect to Epstein?
Israel's very, very close to Epstein. And I broke the story in 2019 when I had two sources on the record tell me that Epstein worked for Israeli military intelligence. Up until then, everyone had mused that he worked for Mossad, CIA, a bunch of other things, but no one really knew anything firm. But I had two people on the record who knew, and I believed them, that he worked for Israeli military intelligence. Now, I didn't have any documents because you don't really get those things about spies or assets, but these guys told me. One was Stephen Hoffenberg. He's business partners that, he went to prison, but all these guys have spent time doing
Yeah,
crime. So you
Epstein
can't,
never went to prison, but
yeah,
Stephen did.
yeah, Stephen did. And to his credit, spent the rest of his life once he got out of prison trying to expose Epstein. And the other one was Ari Ben Menashe, who again you might say, well, he's questionable, but on the other hand, he was Robert Maxwell's handler, and knew a lot about what was going on inside Israeli military intelligence because he was part of the directorate of Israeli military intelligence. So he knew a thing, and he knew what Robert Maxwell was. And he's the one who told me that Robert Maxwell introduced Jeffrey Epstein to him in the 1980s, which is well before any previous record of of Jeffrey Epstein and Robert Maxwell or Ghislaine Maxwell having emerged. And that Maxwell told him, and I'll make sure I get the wording correctly, that he wanted Jeffrey to be part of the operation, and that his bosses had approved of him already, meaning that the bosses at Israeli military intelligence had already given the green light for Jeffrey Epstein to be part of this Israeli military intelligence operation, which was selling weapons to Iran. Now, interestingly, this all goes back to the Rothschilds and a whole bunch of other things. So the connection to Israel is endless. I could talk about it for hours and hours and hours, but there's a thread there, and it's not surprising. There's a lot of Russian oligarchs, very, very powerful Russian oligarchs that are also Israeli oligarchs. They built their own oligarchy in Israel. Bibi Netanyahu is very much like Vladimir Putin, is very much like Donald Trump. It's that same kind of strongman mentality, but it's really a misnomer. It's about a mob government, a mafia government that's taking over the world.
And David Cleon, who's Jewish American, wrote a piece in the Jewish Currents talking about how Jeffrey Epstein leaned into his Jewish identity and his Jewish roots, and he made sure, because he himself is Jewish American, right, you're not to indulge in any of those conspiratorial anti-Semitism. But he's like, listen, this is what happened. He was a Jewish American of Ashkenazi descent of a certain class, and he came of age with a lot of these people who were outsiders who then made it in America. And he leaned in and exploited and used those connections, right? And he said, much of his early wealth came from these Jewish American connections. Bear Stearns, for example, right? A lot of his clients. Then Robert Maxwell, Ghislaine Maxwell. Robert Maxwell, like you said, had ties to Israel. Also, Alan Dershowitz, Leslie Wexner, right? So he says, like, essentially, he kind of used and abused these type of network privileges and his Jewish identity to get in close with these people. And they're like, oh, you're one of us. You're a guy who came from nothing. You're middle class. And look at you. You're up and comer. And then also some of the world's worst people. Then he comes in and, does what he does and gets compromised and provides girls. But, if I'm Israel, and I've always said this, if I'm an intelligence of any nation state, and I know there's a guy who has connections to the world's most wealthy, powerful people, including financial institutions, and that he lures them to, or not even have to lure them, let's just be honest, invites them. Or sometimes, like Elon Musk, people want to get invited. They send very giddy emails begging to be invited.
When's the next wild party?
When's
When's
the
going to
next
have
wild
it?
party, right?
Yeah.
If I know that man is inviting these people to have sex parties where they rape girls, to me, that's a man I try to cultivate and as an asset, because I know he probably has evidence that I can then use as a foreign government to put sway on these people who are in high positions of power, which explains why Zev, I get it why Israel is the one that put all the surveillance in Jeffrey Epstein's townhouse. And that means Israel probably has compromise on God knows how many people.
Yeah, Ari Ben-Menashe said to me that the reason that Epstein was set on Clinton was in order to scuttle the Oslo talks. And in
I buy
fact,
that.
he did. He did scuttle the Oslo talks. And by the way, financed the play Oslo years later about the scuttled talks. And there's lots of evidence in the Epstein files, and I've written about this as well at narrative.org, about his connections to the failure of Oslo, and the later talks with Hud Barak at Camp David. This is you know it's a generous version of the story when you say it that way, that he was cultivated or whatever. When Wexner was testifying in his deposition the other day, he said that he got a reference for Jeffrey Epstein from the Rothschilds. Now, this guy was a math teacher and a failed Bear Stearns guy at best. And he gets a recommendation from the Rothschilds because he's been working for the Rothschilds in Europe for a period of time. Well, that's great, but I'm sure Elie de Rothschild did not give recommendations to anybody who he didn't know personally and knew worked for him and was going to be useful to him. So, I think Rothschilds and the Rothschild banks have a lot to answer for, and I'm glad there was finally a raid at the Rothschild bank
Last
last
week.
week. And I'm not saying that, it's very easy to trip into a Jewish conspiracy, an anti-Jewish conspiracy here. And that's why I really, I'm Jewish. I think it is important to really expose this, but to expose it in great detail, because it is easy to say, hey, it's just the Jews. It's not just the Jews. It's a small group of Jews amongst them. And they are, connected through various lineages to royal families and other powers around the world, and they are the funders to a large extent of a lot of these operations. Now, do they work with Israeli military intelligence? We don't know. Are they they are originators of Israel. The Rothschilds paid for Israel's establishment to a large extent, at least in the early days. They were involved in settling people there. They paid for the Knesset to be built. They're a very powerful, influential family around the world. And they were his sponsors really early on in the 1980s. This is a kid out of Brooklyn
There you go.
who had,
Working class.
how is he getting recommendations from Elie de Rothschild?
Yeah, working class kid out of Brooklyn. And, for those, and I'm glad you said that, Zev, as well. And people are like, why does that sound anti Semitic? I just posted the article, The Line Between Affinity Conspiracy. Epstein relied on Jewish in group bonds to cultivate the network that facilitated his crimes. David Cleon, who's also Jewish American,
Mhm.
was invited last month to talk about it. I just posted the article. It's on Jewish Currents, which is specifically talks about how he used and abused these cultural bonds to get in these spaces.
Yeah.
And then once he got in these spaces, again, you have to be very careful. I think you should be careful. It's not the Jews. It's, these individuals within these powerful places who then, much like Epstein, were into these things. So it's a few group of these individuals, power, wealth, and it's not just Jews, as you can clearly see. It's Jews, it's Christians, it's atheists. There's a Muslim in there. It is an Epstein class. It is the world's 1% of the 1%, right?
Mhm.
And Epstein used and abused anything he could to gain leverage. So if he can use and abuse his Jewish bonds, he did. If he can use and abuse, his wealth, he did. If he can use and abuse his intelligence, he did. He's perfectly chummy with Peter Thiel, who is a gay white nationalist.
Mhm.
Hey, if we could
Of
bring down,
German origin. So there you
what's
go.
that?
Of German origin. So,
Of German origin, right? So if we
yeah.
could bring it all there, so do it. I want people just to realize that, because when I had this conversation with David Cleon, we talked about that. Like, how do you avoid it? He goes, bro, I'm Jewish. I get it. But I also have to then look. David said, I also have to just look at the facts. And the facts is that he used these in bonds as this middle class American Jewish guy, who literally, like, you ask yourself, how did he get from there to there?
Mhm.
And he exploited every little relationship that he could. And unfortunately, he got into bed with the world's worst people. And some of those
Well,
people are Donald Trump, who is mentioned more than any other person in the Epstein files.
I think this is so important, Waj, because the vast number of American Jews are actually very liberal-minded, at least very centrist. They're very supportive of the American project, at least in the ideology. I think you'll find that there have been, in every aspect of American life, there are very hardworking people who are Jewish that do a tremendous amount of good for our society and who help America become a great country and have done so throughout generations. And the cynical part of all of this is that the small, really ultra religious, which is, I'm talking about the sort of Chabad network group of people that Epstein came from and that a lot of these people are associated with, are actually the Russian side of Jewry. There's the most Russian Jews are Chabadniks. They are much more orthodox. They're much more extremist in their thinking. Some would even call it a sect. The vast American Jews are more liberal minded, are more centrist, are they're American. And what Epstein and company were doing, they were using the extremist Jews to sort of find cover in America amongst the other Jews. And so you land up with this kind of situation where these extremist sect within the Jewish religion is weaponizing itself against the other Jews in America, and those are the people who are going to end up suffering because the anti-Semitism is real. It's rising because of Jeffrey Epstein, because of this war in Iran, because of all these things that are or Gaza. These are terrible things that are happening in the world, but they're being done by a small group of people. But everyone in the Jewish community pays for it,
Yeah, no,
and we
absolutely, and that's
really
why
have to separate that.
it's so terrible when Benjamin Netanyahu, who's a war criminal, says, "I am the leader of the Jewish people," and then
Yeah.
when Jonathan Greenblatt of ADL says, "Oh, you can't criticize the Jewish state," and I'm like, "You have no idea what you're doing. Is you're the one providing the framing to
Mhm.
anti-Semites, saying, 'Oh, Israel represents all Jews. Israel represents Judaism. You're doing this on behalf of Jews.' Okay." And then voila, you have white nationalist extremists, violent Muslim jihadists who then say it isn't just Epstein or Wexner or de Rothschilds or Ben Gavir, it's the Jews. So
Yeah.
I think it's very important, and also it's a very good point. Something we've said is that the worst thing for Jewish security to me is the modern nation state of Israel under this genocidal regime. I'm sure you saw yesterday Itmar Ben Gavir popping champagne or trying to pop cheap champagne as Israel passed an apartheid law where the death penalty is reserved only for Palestinian criminals convicted under military court.
I didn't see that. No, that's
Yeah, yeah.
terrible.
Yesterday, it's gone viral, and then also this war, and then the more and more the Epstein class comes out, you see, oh, Epstein, he has ties to Israel. So folks, you're going to hear the Candace Owens and the Tucker Carlson, all these other people, kind of casually say the Jews or stuff like that. Try your best. Try your best to step in and intervene because I said this before, Zev, a couple of days ago, as this is all coming out, right? And especially the war in Iran is making it so much worse. I'm telling you that the casual radicalization I've been saying this, I've been
I've
warning
seen it too everywhere.
so the
You,
suburban
yeah.
aunties,
Mhm.
because they're enraged by the Epstein class, then they're enraged by the 1% of the oligarchy, then they're enraged by the Iran war, and then they hear, the few people who are moved to the left of the Democratic Party on Israel, Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, Nick Fuentes, are also, wait for it, have a history of anti-Semitism, and now just, I'm sure you've heard it. It's now it becomes, look at the Jews, man. It's the Jews.
Everywhere, everywhere. It's seeped into every part of society, which just tells you how it's now just a mantra that people use. And certainly anti-Zionism is considered like a completely normal, legitimate thing. And he said, it's an ideological conversation you can have. And Zionism is an ideology that could mean anything, really. It could be implemented in many ways or introduced in any ways or interpreted in many ways. But the idea that this is the problem, the Rothschild, for years, I grew up with this notion of you can't talk about the Rothschilds. You can't write about the Rothschilds because you're participating in this anti-Jewish trope that the Rothschilds symbolize. Well, in fact, that's exactly the opposite of what we need to be doing. We need to be talking about the Rothschilds and not about all Jews, because it is about the Rothschilds in this case. And there is a lot to be said about them, and we need to be looking at them and we need to investigate them, no matter who they bank for or who their clients are. That's an important line of investigation. And it's not one we could just walk away from. They're an incredibly powerful family. Of course, it's scary to do these kinds of things, but if you don't do that, you're potentially allowing all this much greater calamity to happen, which we saw in the Holocaust, which we've seen elsewhere in American and world history, where Jews get slaughtered. The Jews get, it's genocide when this kind of thing happens, and we need to be really specific and tell the story, tell the truth about what Epstein did, and not be afraid of it.
And I think, you know, it's look, I'm Muslim. It's been my life ever since the war on terror. It's the unfair double standards. But when you are more honest, and when you call it out and you don't engage in this type of not airing of dirty laundry in order to protect the tribe, right? You come off as inauthentic, and then the hate markers attack you. But when you air the dirty laundry and you're morally consistent, what I've seen is people go, "Oh, cool, that's a Muslim guy being morally consistent against terrorism, regardless of who
Mhm.
does it." Right? Awesome.
Yeah.
I think that's when like Jewish American authors and researchers and investigative journalists like you call it out. A lot of people are like, "Oh man, that's good." Like, you know what, Zev, respect. You know, as a Jewish American who's a person who's born in Israel, you're calling this out, and I think what it just does consciously to people, it's like, oh yeah, it's like this cabal of terrible people. Some of them who happen to be Jewish. I get it. Happens in Catholicism, Islam, atheists, and I think it neutralizes the anti-Semitic cover that Tucker Carlson and the right wing and is moving under, folks. It's really scary. People, I'm telling you, it has become people have become radicalized in real time.
Yeah.
You can't de-radicalize them anymore, Zev. I can't.
People are, can't imagine America having a Holocaust. I can imagine America having a Holocaust. I don't think it's that hard to imagine when you look at the trend lines,
Slavery?
when you look at what Vance is saying. Everything is becoming so clear that this is the path that MAGA is going to follow. The sort of right wing radicalization is going to go even further. They're allowing LGBTQ conversion therapy. This is all the same line that's happened in Germany. We're going to see mass disappearances, mass arrests of people coming in the years ahead in the United States, unless we find a way to stop it now and the courage to stop it now. And everyone should be, needs to find that courage right now, because all of us have a duty to be responsible to the next generations. And sure, a lot of people aren't going to do that. But, if you're a person of morality and you're a person of ethics, you have to tell the truth in this matter, and you have to be able to lean into it. And especially if you're a Jewish person or a Muslim person, it's your job. I don't know, my job in any event, to be, as a reporter, to tell the truth. And I can't not do that based on my faith. I'm not going to lie for anybody based on my faith. And I think it's a mistake to lie. I think it'll hurt us more at the end. I think we'll end up with a much
Absolutely.
worse scenario.
And you know, I have my track record speaks for itself. You don't see me here making excuses for UAE or Qatar or the Iranian regime or Saudi Arabia. I don't think you all ever have, or for what Hamas, the violence that Hamas has done. But I try to be morally consistent, folks, and that type of moral consistency requires a type of accountability. And regardless of who that net catches, assuming that net catches the right people, you know, you give them due process. But if that person ends up being American, you go after him. If that person ends up being, I don't know, the president of the United States, you go after them. If that person ends up being, I don't know, Ehud Barak, you go after them, right? You go after all these people, which is why, again, it goes back to, I think, the Epstein class, Zev. I think it's so important for all the reasons that we mentioned that we have to do a thorough investigation of the Epstein class. There needs to be due process. There needs to be indictments, because in the absence of accountability and transparency, you get, first and foremost, criminality. You get the rape of girls. You get the cover up. You get the world's worst people who believe that they can keep doing this again and again and again with impunity. But you also get, as we're clearly seeing in real time, massive conspiracy theories, which at the end of the day end up hurting the most marginalized people.
Mhm. Absolutely. I've been doing Epstein research for 10 years, and I've been following the money on Epstein since day one, because I just felt like, well, 6 years on Epstein, but Trump and Epstein for 10 years. I am a firm believer that the money is the trail to find all the evidence. And the evidence that we're looking for is not just about the girls. There is evidence about the girls, and we know a lot about them. What we don't know a lot about, and we're finding out through The Greatest Heist and the Narrative and other places, is the financial crimes which have stolen the wealth and the promise of America. And people need to understand that it's not some out there thing that happens to other people. It's happened to you at home, because it's your home that might have been lost in 2008, and it might be your kids' education that was lost in 2008, or it might be your entire retirement plan that was lost in these endless amounts of crashes. And how is the wealthiest country in the world, like the United States, unable to balance its budget? Where is that money going? That money has left us and has gone to sovereign funds and to other entities that have stolen it from under us using decades and decades of criminality. And it's a personal thing for every American. I mean, every American should be completely outraged that their birthright has been completely squandered and stolen by these foreign entities.
And also, folks, just look at it. Lord Mandelson resigned, the UK ambassador to the United States, also an associate of Epstein in a very compromising photo in his underwear with a girl. But why are they investigating him? Because he used and abused, allegedly, his position to give sensitive information to Epstein. You see the same thing happening with Andrew. Even though we know allegedly he raped girls, he was arrested. Why? Because he used and abused, allegedly, his position as trade minister to give documents and information to Epstein. The Rothschilds last week, they were raided in France. Why? Specifically, again, someone connected to them used and abused that position to give information to Epstein. A lot of that is potential financial information. Then you also see Bear Stearns involved, JP Morgan involved, Bank of America involved. That just gave what, 96 million
Yeah,
payoff?
something like that. Yeah.
Something like that, right? So
And it's not only it's political stuff too. I mean, they were handing confidential documents of the British government or the United
national security.
Nations or to Epstein, who had no business knowing all this stuff. He had no. He was, again, going back to the beginning of this conversation, was advising Putin on leapfrogging the American economy using crypto. What are we seeing today? The American economy being leapfrogged by crypto, by Russia. I mean, this is the same. You can see it in real time. We don't need much more evidence than that to know that the plan emanated from this guy. And so what you're describing there is this political compromise, this political back and forth that was going. That's all criminal and it's treasonous. And it's treasonous for those people that were arrested. And it's treasonous right now for the president of the United States to be undergoing this war and pushing this crypto policy that Howard Lutnick and David Sachs and everyone is doing. That's treason. That's not helping America. That's aiding and abetting our enemies. And that's the bottom line of that story. I just think people need to reframe this as both personal and as being treasonous.
Yeah, I completely agree. And you mentioned something, I'll leave people with this image. It's an incestuous circle.
Mhm.
Lutnick is the Secretary of Commerce who was in business with Epstein. Donald Trump mentioned more than any other person than Epstein. Donald Trump and his family have made up to $5 billion in crypto. The person who helped them make that money got pardoned by Donald Trump. Who passed the Genius Act, the first pro-crypto legislation? Donald Trump. Who has threatened states that you can't regulate AI? Donald Trump. Not making that up. Who's the czar of AI and crypto? David Sachs. Who was David Sachs's buddy? Who did he make money with? The PayPal mafia. Who's the PayPal mafia? Peter Thiel and Elon Musk. Who gave Donald Trump the most money to win the election? Some would say rig the election. Elon Musk. Who was buddy with Jeffrey Epstein and shared his eugenics, racist, post-World War II collapse order? Peter Thiel. It's like, that was just the top of my head, Zeb.
That's really well done. That was well done. That's a hell of a chain you drew there. But it's
Well,
true.
I didn't make up anything. That's
It's
literally top of
all
my head.
factually proven. Every single name you mentioned there, everything is it's factual. This is not conspiracy theory. This is not what did Michael Wolff call us? Conspiracy buffs. This is not Eddie. Well, it might be a conspiracy. It is a conspiracy. It's a criminal conspiracy.
That's right.
But it's not some made up stuff. It's factual, proven. Evidence is all there. Nothing we're saying is made up. None of it.
Yeah, it's all literally read his emails. Like literally. Read
Yeah.
the emails, read the correspondences, look at the links. It's all there. Zev, I have to bring on Katie Fang to talk about some, well, like you said, the terrible Supreme Court ruling today. But can you please shamelessly promote yourself, sir?
Yes, I can shamelessly try to promote myself. I'm terrible at these things, but everyone can check out my stuff at narrative.org. That's NARATIV.org. I do a lot of work on Epstein and Trump, but I also do the daily news as you do in different ways. We do the 5 Stack every day at 3 o'clock
Right.
with Dean Blundell. I do lots of other shows across the time every day. And everyone should just feel free to join us. We have free subscriptions. We have paid subscriptions. I'm not as generous as you, just give it all away for free because it's a lot of work and cost me a lot of money along the way. So paid subscribers pay for all these investigations. They're the number one reason we can do these, multi-year investigations into Epstein to find out where the money came from and where it went. That's all because of our paid subscribers. So if you can become a subscriber, whether it's free or paid, we're happy to have you there. And I hope you'll enjoy the coverage that we give you of everything Trump, but also of Epstein and the greatest heist, which I write.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And he's been on the money trail for a while. And again, folks, just look at the evidence, right? Because there's so much conspiracy theories out there. Just take a deep breath, connect the dots, and it's all there. And Zev helps piece it together. Thank you, Zev, for coming. Everyone, please subscribe to narrative.org. If you can't subscribe to the Left Hook, give your money to Narrative. The Left Hook is free. If you have $3.75 left over, I have a special on. Just give $3.75 a month forever. If not,
You're worth every cent of it, Waj. You're one of the hardest working and smartest guys on this platform. And it's always a pleasure being on with you because you know your stuff so well. So
I,
everyone
I
should subscribe
I
and
listen to
support you.
people who've done the work, like you and Ellie and everyone else. Thank you all for watching, and come back in 1 minute. We got Katie Fang to talk about this horrific Supreme Court ruling today, of all days, on National Transgender Visibility Day. My God. Thank you all for watching. Take care, be kind, and be back in 1 minute. Thanks, Ev.
Cheers. Thanks, Waj. Thanks, everyone. Bye.